Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our talk, Negotiating Membership and Validity Across the Etic and Non-Binary as Heritage Linguists in Higher Education, presented by my colleagues, Angelina A. Cabrera and Mackenzie P. Santi, and myself, Laura S. Griffin. All three of us are heritage linguists, and we'll be sharing some of our experiences with identity negotiation in this talk today. So as a quick roadmap, first, we're going to introduce the concept of heritage language and linguistics, provide some definitions, and then talk about how we negotiate our identities from both a community and academic perspective. And we'll finish with a call to action on how we can best support heritage linguists in academia. So first of all, what is heritage language? This is something that's been famously difficult to define. And in this talk, we adopt the definition by Hood 2011, which is that a heritage language is a language that is often used at or inherited from home, and that is different from the language used in mainstream society. Some important and key points of this definition is that there is no presupposition of proficiency by any party. There is no talking about the level of acquisition that is attained, and it is inclusive of both receptive and productive skills. Heritage linguistics has gained a lot of traction over the past 20 or 30 years. Existing studies on heritage linguistics focus on the idea of incomplete acquisition and how this can influence language proficiency in areas such as syntax, semantics, phonetics, phonology, etc. So how heritage speakers may differ from homeland speakers. Heritage linguistics also informs studies on language ideologies and its development, as well as interactions at school, home, and work. This kind of study is really important because it challenges conceptions of heritage and culture as something static. Instead, it shows that speakers engage actively with language to construct and align their identities. A lot of the current studies focus on heritage speakers as objects of study or as participants. However, the pressures and expectations of heritage academics are often overlooked and underrepresented, a gap that we seek to fill with our talk today.
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is Mackenzie, and I'm going to be speaking to this slide here about our experiences as heritage linguists working within our communities. And I want to start out by saying that academia and community do not inherently create an absolute binary or poles that are in opposition, though it may very much feel that way at times. And thinking of these two entities as opponents raises the potential for and the worry of alienation, be it ourselves from the community or of the community back to us. This is something that weighs on the minds of our people who are existing and thriving in both of these spaces. And now, related to that, we see this term here, sellout, or becoming a sellout. This is a term that may be used to describe an individual who is perceived by community members to have made a choice in this so-called binary, where the further perception then is that they chose wrong. Now, this has the potential to, and often feeds into the reality of a very troubling internal dialogue that all too often is unbeknownst to our non-heritage linguist colleagues, who may have no concept of what it means to be part of a community such as this, are disconnected from heritage linguistics as a concept, let alone what it means to mitigate and find our place through these insider and outsider lenses. And now, insider and outsider too are much more gradient within the context of heritage linguistics. And depending on the connection to community that exists, this experience may require a great deal of work to reintegrate with the community of people, the community as it exists physically, and as well as the community of speakers. And so, turning to this note here on the slide, having elders or language teachers speak to you in a way or seeing you as a child can be incredibly disheartening and involves processes that are taken for granted by the formalities of linguistics, citing its extractive and very outsider-based roots. An interesting dichotomy, however, though, that was noted by my heritage linguist colleagues is the difference in treatment between non-heritage and heritage learners. So when working with elders, the heritage learner can often be met with some quite harsh and disheartening, as I mentioned, comments and feedback, while the non-heritage learner, by contrast, is praised for their willingness to try. So then, when you have this connection, and speaking from my own experience here, I'm someone who is physically and otherwise part of my community, I've made it my goal to maintain this relationship and attenuate all of my work towards this language, which, often creates something of an uphill battle, which is very much a shared experience. And as well, considering that we're still in the midst of an ideological shift in linguistics towards things like community-centered work and ethical considerations of the community, the field at large still has so much to learn. Now, an example of this needing to learn comes from a situation where I was tasked with eliciting some nonce words from an L1 speaker to isolate phonotactics. And even with a dutiful and reciprocal relationship with the community, I still felt that I wasn't doing my community justice with this kind of documentation. I was being incredibly passive with, regard to revitalization and the reclamation of our rightful language. And it became very blatant just how much work it would take to make this meaningful to my community, which is something that's really important to me. And, linguistics is very much a science, and working too hastily, it quickly becomes a very cold field. The formal practices that are taught for work with consultants still fails to take into account that this language has a culture and its own way of doing things. Without this kind of background work, some of the practices that we're taught can quickly lead to some really uncomfortable situations that lack respect on the part of the linguist. However, when turning to heritage work, you're working within a community and a culture that you know, and it's, again, the field of linguistics that has the most to learn, and not the field from the language. To describe the culturally required facets for doing documentation and beyond requires an immense amount of justification, not only to the academy, which is something that will be returned to, but also justifying your positionality to the community, building, informing, and reforming these relationships that will allow these community-driven projects to come to fruition. These are opportunities and difficult conversations that are afforded in a meaningful and often difficult way specifically to heritage linguists. And maintaining the culturally and linguistically encoded ethics often requires us to go off script from what our classical and formal training may prescribe, as well as looking at the continual effort that it requires in promoting ourselves and our work to the community. All of this is to say that, regardless of the attitudes that we're met with, we have a people and we have a place outside of the academy who we are indebted to, that have and continue to guide our journeys in acquisition, in academia, and of overall growth. As heritage linguists, we must carry and promote ourselves and our work in a way that is respectful to these people and to these places. Nyawa.
Thank you, Mackenzie, for sharing some of the unique experiences we heritage linguists oftentimes face when working within our own language communities. Pivoting now, I'd like us to focus on the struggles and issues we encounter within our institutions. And in order to begin this conversation, it's necessary to bring to light the microaggressions and racism that can still occur within the field of linguistics. First, Eurocentric ideals persist. I'd like to illustrate this with one of my personal experiences. Since my undergraduate years, I've been interested in working with one of my heritage languages, Kapampangan, which is a Philippine language. In particular, I have been fascinated by its orthography systems. Today, Kapampangan uses 3 different orthographies: a Romanized alphabet based on Spanish conventions, a reformed Romanized alphabet inspired by the conventions implemented by Tagalog nationalists, and the indigenous Abogida Kulitan that has seen a resurgence in times of colonial resistance and Filipino cultural revitalization. When expressing my excitement over modern efforts and successes in bolstering Kulitan's acquisition and usage, several of my advisors had considered it antiquated and expressed that the standardization of one of the more Romanized alphabets would be more beneficial to the conservation of Kapampangan. While I understand their positioning from a documentary lens, these opinions overlook the historical and cultural significance in the use of the original indigenous writing script in favor of the westernized Romanized alphabets. Moreover, these opinions denigrate the recent work to encode the Abogida in Unicode and teach it via mobile applications. Moving on to other issues, we heritage linguists have at times been put in situations to represent not only our community, but related or surrounding language communities, which can feel rather reductionist. For instance, while I feel like I could comfortably speak on Kapampangan and Tagalog kinship terms, I'm definitely not knowledgeable enough to make generalizations about kinship terms in all Philippine languages. And yet, heritage linguists are often called upon to know such information. Another very common experience is the invalidation or undervaluing of a relevant cultural and linguistic knowledge of our heritage language. There have been times that my co-authors and I have attempted to correct a misconception or misinformation brought up in a class or lecture, to then have a peer or professor counter that our knowledge of our language was wrong, as it contradicted something they read or heard prior. Regardless of their sources, this discourages us from wanting to share our firsthand experience and knowledge of our language. While less so, there are still instances where we witness the unfair treatment of other language holders and consultants. Paired with the egregious harvester mentality, there have been times where these consultants have been treated diminutively, despite sharing the linguistic and cultural information that becomes an honor and asset to document. Watching these individuals be treated more like a means to an end than like venerated equals brings into question how we would be treated if we were in their position, with no linguistic training, degrees, or certification to validate our right to operate within these academic spaces as peer. Granted, we do acknowledge that some of these issues have been brought up broadly during discussions of field ethics and etiquette, and that current work is being done to put a stop to the harmful and primitive, Eurocentric, colonialist, and racist perspectives firmly accepted within linguistics. However, there is still a lot of work to be done, with particular attention to nuances and experiences of heritage linguists, especially as more and more linguists are taking up the responsibility to document and conserve their heritage languages. This slide is meant to recognize some of the additional experiences my fellow presenters and I have been met with during our academic careers. We would like to highlight these ordeals as we hope to bring awareness to some of the problematic pressures, expectations, and shortcomings that we have had to weather without the adequate training or guidance on how to navigate these special circumstances as heritage linguists. It is sometimes hard to ignore the differing pressures and levels of praise received from advisors and faculty when comparing heritage linguists and their colleagues, particularly in cases in which a heritage language is underdocumented or the academic is a person of color. These linguists are often pressured to work on their language. Furthermore, these heritage linguists are expected to be fluent in order for any form of proficiency to be accepted or validated. Meanwhile, their colleagues without an inherited connection to the same language will receive positive feedback for any acquisition or work done. As heritage linguists, we feel expected to be an expert on our language, lest we be seen as an unreliable source or clueless. And despite our own anxieties over our levels of expertise, we hope that we sound as though we speak with authority, lest someone get a negative first impression of how knowledgeable we are. As heritage linguists, we feel expected to have a high degree of in-group access to our language community, even if we're from a diaspora separate from the land the language originated from, even if our parents or grandparents did not pass down language or culture, and even if we ourselves are rediscovering our heritage and its language that may feel familiar, but is awfully foreign. Departments have begun to see the value of training up language consultants and encouraging linguists to document their own language. And yet, these same departments don't quite act like their heritage linguists are the assets that they are. Oh, you don't know how to say, and I think you spelled that one word wrong. Or, so you only have an elementary understanding of, and it's okay if you know nothing. More often than you'd think, we receive the demoralizing and insensitive comments that you would never use with a language consultant. And sometimes these comments can delve further into discriminatory connotations, and your department will begin to feel not as safe as you had originally thought. As heritage linguists, the complex feelings and anxieties that accompany taking on the responsibility to diligently and carefully document, conserve, and revitalize our heritage languages can feel perilous. We often go into this work blind. There may be talks to educate linguists on how to establish relationships in a new language community, but not how to maintain existing relationships if you're already a part of said community. There may be seminars to give linguists a crash course on best elicitation practices and methodology, but not how to navigate elicitation sessions within your own families, with your own relatives. These pressures and expectations can be disheartening and difficult. They can compound to make you feel as though your efforts are not enough, and you fail as a linguist. You fail as a speaker of your heritage language. You fail as a member of your community. And you're an imposter in both academia and the community. It can often feel like you're doing your best to acquire the language and do right by the language community, just like any other linguist. But your heritage has now become a burden rather than a benefit because it is a cause for a higher degree of scrutiny and criticism. Departments need to provide more support and guidance to their heritage linguists.
Thanks, Angeli. We end this talk today with a call to action to how we can directly benefit heritage linguists in institutions. Firstly is an emphasis on more inclusive training. Instructors can make explicit reference to linguists who work on their own heritage language and encourage students to make comparisons between the in-group and out-group experience. Instructors can also rely on their own experiences to share with students. Current training presupposes that all students are not community members, and so a lot of advice that is given, for example, stay out of community politics, is not applicable for heritage linguists. Focusing on capacity building also is an important tool to help heritage linguists navigate their responsibilities to their communities and to the institution. Having instructors who encourage community-oriented dissemination of knowledge and information is invaluable to help heritage linguists support their communities. Secondly, we ask instructors to introspect about how they communicate their expectations for language proficiency. Do you set specific standards for proficiency before a student works on a language? For example, they should be conversational, can read scholarly articles in the language, or rather, are you okay with them learning as they go? How consistent are you with language proficiency expectations across students? Does it depend on the language, the project, or perhaps even the student? Thirdly, we also ask instructors to think about how they can create safe spaces in classes to avoid putting heritage linguists on the spot. For me, I was asked to prove my heritage language proficiency, Korean, in front of a class while reading from a Romanized alphabet, which I was not familiar with. Putting students on the spot in this way can embarrass them in front of their peers and dissuade them from working on their heritage language versus a separate language, which can be viewed as lower risk. Lastly, we highly encourage students to share more of their personal experiences and their needs. Of course, we encourage instructors to do this as well, but we highly encourage students to do this to create community and to not feel so alone when experiencing alienation and macroaggressions. In our experience as the three of us, we found it also helps when presenting worries and solutions as a unit to be a larger and stronger block, although of course it is possible to do this at the individual level as well. In conclusion, there's important work on heritage language to be done, but existing obstacles to heritage linguists and students prevent this research and development. Recognizing these unique challenges will allow professors to better address and support these students. We are interested in hearing more from heritage linguist experiences, and we encourage you to reach out to us. Our emails are on the first slide of this presentation. Our ultimate goal is to help create a learning or lesson plan to distribute to institutions to directly address heritage linguist needs, especially to aid instructors who may not have experience working as an in-group community member. We are also interested in hearing experiences from language consultants and cultural experts. If you're a knowledge holder who is willing to share your story, please also contact us. A lot of existing literature focuses on the linguist experience as an outsider, but there is no avenue or equivalent voice given for community members' experience when working with linguists. Your voice is extremely important and must be equal respect and attention given. Thank you for listening to our talk, and we look forward to seeing you during the question and answer section.